You hear it first, not with your ears, but with something deeper. A place where your phone dies, and so might you. I've spent weeks digging into what they call Japan's most forbidden zone. And trust me, what I found is worse than ghosts. They say there's a sign at the entrance. The Japanese Constitution does not apply beyond this point. Sounds like a horror movie, right? But here's the thing that kept me up at night. Inunaki Village was real, and it didn't disappear because of curses. It disappeared because we drowned it. And with it, we drowned the truth until one night in 1988 when the darkness crawled back out. Let me take you back to 1999. A Japanese TV station received an anonymous letter, handwritten, shaking, desperate. The writer claimed they'd barely escaped Inunaki with their life. Their friend wasn't so lucky. Never seen again. According to the legend, if you drive deep enough into those mountains, you'll find it. A tunnel that leads nowhere good. Past the tunnel, there's supposedly a village where time stopped. Or maybe where humanity did. The stories all agree on one detail. The people there don't follow laws. Any laws. Not Japan's, not morality's, not yours. Internet forums exploded with testimonies. One user posted, "They surrounded my car. I locked the doors. That didn't matter." Another wrote about a phone booth near the tunnel. Every night at 2 a.m., it rings. If you answer, you hear your own voice screaming. These stories share a pattern. Technology fails, GPS loops, batteries drain. It's like the place exists outside our reality's rules. But what really got to me was the detail about the Constitution sign. Why would someone put that up? What were they trying to warn us about? See, in Japan, a country obsessed with order, rules, and social harmony, the idea of a lawless zone is the ultimate nightmare. It triggers something primal. What if civilization is just a thin layer? What if, in the mountains, something older is still awake? Now, I could just feed you these internet stories and call it a day, but that's not why you're here, and it's not what I found. Because when I started digging into Inunaki's actual history, I realized the legend is a lie. But the truth underneath? That's the real horror. So let me show you what actually happened to Inunaki Village. Not the version the internet wants, the version the government tried to erase. Inunaki was real, all right. It was founded in 1691, over 300 years ago, by the Fukuoka domain as an industrial outpost. Not a cult hideout, not a cannibal colony. A place where skilled craftsmen made ceramics and steel that supplied the entire region. The first village chief was Bunai Shinozaki, officially appointed. There are records, registries, tax documents, all the boring proof that ruins a good ghost story. By the 1800s, Inunaki even had a castle well, a fortified residence built on the recommendation of a strategist named Kato Shisho. Does this sound like a place outside the law? It was literally governed by feudal bureaucrats filing reports in triplicate. Then, in 1889, something changed. The Meiji government reorganized rural Japan. Inunaki was absorbed into Yoshikawa Village, then Wakamiya Town. On paper, Inunaki ceased to exist as an independent entity. But people still lived there, farmers, miners, families. Life continued, just without the name. Fast forward to the 1,980 seconds. Japan's economic miracle needed water, lots of it for Fukuoka's exploding population and factories. Engineers looked at maps and saw Inunaki Valley. Remote, sparsely populated, geologically perfect for a dam. Problem solved, right? Except those dots on the map were homes, shrines, cemeteries, generations of memory. But memory doesn't generate kilowatts, does it? In 1986, construction began. Families were relocated, compensated, they say. Though you can't really price a hometown, can you? By 1994, the The dam was complete. Millions of tons of concrete. A reservoir so deep, sunlight doesn't reach the bottom. And beneath that water lies the real Inunaki houses, workshops, the shrine where villagers prayed for 3 centuries. All of it drowned. Now here's where it gets twisted. Around the same time the dam was being built, urban explorers started finding ruins in the mountains nearby. But these weren't the submerged village. These were demolition sites, worker housing torn down after the dam project wrapped up. People saw collapsed walls, rusty tools, and their imaginations did the rest. This must be the cannibal village. No, it was a break room. See, humans need patterns. We need stories. When we see ruins without context, our brains fill in the gaps, usually with monsters. But there's another layer to this legend that nobody talks about. Japan's Burakumin history. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. For centuries, people who worked in impure trades, butchers, tanners, undertakers, were segregated into hidden villages and treated as subhuman. These communities were labeled dangerous, dirty, lawless. Sound familiar? The same words used in the Inunaki legend. I'm not saying Inunaki was a Burakumin village, records suggest it wasn't. But the legend borrowed the same fears, the same prejudices, the same dehumanization. It's a story about what happens when we decide some people or some places exist outside civilization. We make them into myths, then into monsters. So the legend grew throughout the 90 seconds and early 2000s. Chat rooms, forums, horror blogs, each retelling added details, made it more real. But all those stories, all that fear, they were built on a foundation of half-truths, demolished worker camps, and recycled prejudice. The village people feared never existed. But here's the thing that'll make your skin crawl. Something genuinely evil did happen there. Not in a fictional village. In a very real tunnel. And the monster wasn't supernatural. It was 5 teenage boys. December 7th, 1988. Kouichi Umeyama, 20 years old, factory worker, just wanted to drive home after his shift. At a red light in Tagawa district, 5 teenagers surrounded his car. They wanted it to impress girls. When he refused, they took him. They beat him, held him captive, and when he tried to reason with them, he was just a kid too. They decided he knew too much. Here's the part that breaks me. Kouichi escaped. He ran 2 kilometers toward home. 2 kilometers of hope, of thinking he'd make it. They caught him again. And they made a decision that turned them from criminals into something unforgivable. They drove him to the old Inunaki Tunnel. The same tunnel from the legends poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. Kouichi ran into the tunnel, flames consuming him, screaming. He made it about 30 meters before he collapsed, alone, in the dark. The perpetrators were arrested, trials, sentences, life imprisonment for the ringleader. But Kouichi's life just ended, 20 years old. After the murder, authorities sealed the old tunnel. Massive concrete blocks, warning signs, "Do not enter," as if rocks could contain what happened. And this real atrocity became the seed crystal for the legend's final form. Now explorers came looking for ghosts. They posted videos. "I heard screaming. My camera died at the tunnel," not considering or not caring that a young man burned to death there. The legend had consumed the truth. Kouichi wasn't a ghost haunting the tunnel. He was a victim. But victims don't get clicks, do they? So let me be clear. If you search for Inunaki Village today, what you'll find is tragedy layered on tragedy. Erased villages, exploited histories, murdered innocents. The monsters of Inunaki aren't villagers who never existed. They're the forces that erase communities for progress and the cruelty humans inflict when empathy fails. And maybe that's why we prefer the ghost story. Ghosts are easier than guilt. Monsters are simpler than looking in the mirror. Now I want you to think about something. Why did the legend stick to this specific location? Why Inunaki and not 1,000 other rural tunnels? Because tragedy chose it. The dam erasure gave it mystery. The murder gave it darkness. And the internet gave it immortality. It's a perfect storm of conditions. And our brains are wired to connect dots, even when those dots tell completely different stories. There's a term for this: Apophenia. Seeing patterns in randomness. It's why we see faces in clouds and conspiracies in coincidences. The internet supercharged this. One person posts a creepy photo from the tunnel. Another adds a story. A third connects it to the village legend. Suddenly, it's not 3 separate things, it's one mega legend. Crowdsourced horror, built one Reddit comment at a time. And here's what really gets me. Some people who visited the tunnel genuinely experienced terror. Their fear was real, but what caused it? Not ghosts, expectation. They arrived preloaded with stories, adrenaline pumping, every shadow confirming what they already knew would be there. This is called priming. Tell someone a place is haunted before they enter, and their nervous system does the haunting for you. I'm not mocking them. Fear is biochemically real, regardless of its source. Those explorers felt genuine terror, it just wasn't supernatural. But YouTube titles don't say, "I experienced psychologically induced anxiety at a mundane location." They say, "I barely escaped with my life." And I get it. I really do. The truth is boring. Village demolished for infrastructure project doesn't trend. Cursed village where you'll die does. But here's the cost. Kouichi Umeyama becomes a prop in someone else's ghost story. The displaced villagers become background NPCs in urban legend lore. Real people with real lives are overwritten by fiction. And once that happens, once the legend wins, you can't get the truth back. So, what's the answer? Do we just stop telling scary stories? No, humans need horror. It's how we process fear safely. But we need responsible horror. Horror that doesn't require real people to be erased. Horror that acknowledges when it's built on someone's grave. In 2019, the Japanese government had enough. They installed surveillance cameras around the tunnel area and increased penalties for trespassers. Not because of ghosts, obviously, but because people kept getting hurt, twisted ankles in the dark, falls, hypothermia from getting lost in the mountains overnight. The curse of Inunaki isn't supernatural. It's that the area is genuinely dangerous, unstable structures, wildlife, no cell reception if you need help. Every year, someone ignores the warnings, goes exploring for content, and yeah, sometimes they don't come back. But the reason is gravity, not ghosts. There's a Japanese term, meiwaku, causing trouble for others. That's what thrill seekers do when they need rescue. They burden emergency workers with preventable risk. So if you're watching this thinking, "I want to see Inunaki for myself," please don't. Not because it's cursed, but because it's disrespectful and dangerous. Pay your respects to Kouichi's memory some other way. Donate to violence prevention charities. Learn about Japan's dam relocation histories. Grow. Because the real lesson of Inunaki isn't about supernatural evil. It's about how easily we forget how quickly memory becomes rumor, becomes myth. It happened to the villagers who lost their homes under the reservoir. It happened to Kouichi. It'll happen to all of us eventually, unless we actively remember. Memory is a choice. Horror is easy. But sitting with uncomfortable truth, that's harder. That's what I'm asking you to do now. Sit with the fact that we bulldozed communities for convenience. Sit with the fact that 5 boys thought murder was acceptable. Sit with it. I know that's not satisfying. You came for ghost stories and I gave you sociology and grief. But that's because ghost stories let us off the hook. When the monster is supernatural, we can't stop it. But when the monster is us, our indifference, our cruelty, our amnesia, we can. And maybe that's the scariest realization of all. We have the power to create horror or prevent it, and we keep choosing to create it. Let's talk about what happened after the internet got hold of Inunaki, because that's when the legend stopped being Japanese folklore and became global contagion. By 2010, you could find Inunaki mentioned on creepypasta wikis, YouTube horror channels, Reddit threads, each version mutating slightly, like a virus evolving. Some versions added cannibalism, others added child sacrifice. A few threw in government conspiracies. The core story dissolved into choose your own horror. And here's what's genuinely disturbing. Nobody fact-checks horror. We consume it, share it, and move on. Truth is someone else's problem. I did it too, at first. I saw Inunaki Village trending and thought, great content opportunity. Then, I actually researched it, and I felt sick. Because I realized I was about to do what everyone else had done. Use real tragedy as entertainment seasoning. Add a dash of murder for flavor. So I made a choice. If I was going to tell this story, I had to tell all of it. The boring parts, the uncomfortable parts, the parts that don't trend. And you know what? Maybe this video bombs. Maybe responsible horror doesn't get recommended by the algorithm, but at least I can sleep at night. Because here's the thing about algorithms. They optimize for engagement, not truth. For clicks, not compassion. For watch time, not wisdom. So every time you click on scariest place on earth, you're voting. You're telling the algorithm, this is what I want. And the algorithm listens. It gives you more ghost hunts, more exploitation, more Inunakis, all while the real stories sink into obscurity. But you're still here. You've watched this far, even though I haven't shown you a single jump scare or ghost photo. And that means something. It means maybe we're ready for horror that challenges us instead of just scaring us. Horror that respects both the dead and the living. So let me tell you what I think. Inunaki Village really is not what it was, but what it's become in our collective digital consciousness. It's a mirror. We look at it and see whatever scares us most: lawlessness, isolation, violence, erasure. It reflects our anxieties back at us. And here's the truly horrifying part. I can't kill this legend. You can't kill it. Nobody can. It's immortal now. Even this video, attempting to correct the record, will probably spawn comments saying, "Nice try, government agent," or "This is what they want you to believe." Because once a legend reaches critical mass, it becomes self-sustaining. Every debunking is proof of cover-up. Every fact is suspicious. The legend has achieved what the village never could: true immortality. It lives in servers, in memes, in midnight conversations, everywhere and nowhere. Inunaki Village is a digital ghost now. And unlike ghosts in folklore, you can't exercise code. You can't salt and burn a server farm. So the village that was erased physically in 1986 has been resurrected digitally. Except this version is twisted, corrupted, a zombie of its former self. And every share, every reaction, every comment feeds it. We're not just witnesses to this legend, we're its life support system. I'm doing it right now. By making this video, I'm ensuring another generation discovers Inunaki. Even as I try to correct it, I'm spreading it. It's a paradox. The only way to kill the legend would be collective silence. But silence means Kouichi is forgotten. The villagers are forgotten. So we're stuck. We have to talk about Inunaki to honor the truth, but talking about it perpetuates the myth. There's no clean answer. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the goal isn't to kill the legend, but to complicate it, to add layers of truth until the lie suffocates under the weight. So here's what I'm asking you to do. If you ever see someone share the Inunaki legend, add context, link this video, tell Kouichi's real story. Don't let the algorithm win. Don't let clickbait bury compassion. Be the friction in the machine that slows down sensationalism. And if you want more content like this horror that challenges, that educates, that respects, then subscribe. Because this is risky. This might fail. If you've made it this far, you're already carrying Inunaki with you. Listen, tonight you'll hear it. Not behind you, inside you. The legend lives in us now.